What if I told you that the greatest obstacle standing between you and the life you've always dreamed of isn't your education, your income, your age, or even your circumstances? What if the real barrier has been quietly living inside your own mind this entire time? By the end of this audiobook, you'll discover the 6 invisible fears Napoleon Hill believed secretly control the decisions of millions of people every single day. More importantly, you'll learn how to recognize them, weaken their influence, make better financial decisions, stop procrastinating, build lasting confidence, and finally take action toward the future you've imagined for years. Because once you understand these hidden forces, you'll never look at your own thoughts the same way again. Stay with me until the end, because the final lesson may completely change the way you approach success, money, and even your own potential. There is something fascinating about the human mind. We often spend far more energy fearing things that have never happened than solving the problems already standing in front of us. Someone abandons an incredible business opportunity because they imagine failure before they've even begun. Someone else never starts writing the book they've dreamed about for years because they fear criticism. Others postpone investing, changing careers, launching companies, or pursuing meaningful relationships, not because they lack ability, but because they fear outcomes that exist only inside their imagination. Over time, these imagined futures begin to feel more real than reality itself. And without noticing, fear quietly starts making decisions for them. Have you ever looked back on your life and wondered what might have happened if you had simply been a little braver? Maybe there was a promotion you never applied for. Maybe there was a business idea you kept postponing. Maybe there was someone you wanted to meet, a dream you wanted to chase, or a skill you wished you had started learning years ago. Looking back, the obstacle was rarely a lack of intelligence or talent. More often than not, it was hesitation. And hesitation is often fear wearing a disguise. Napoleon Hill believed that every great achievement begins long before success becomes visible. It begins inside the mind. After studying more than 500 of the world's most successful individuals, including entrepreneurs, inventors, industrial leaders, and visionaries, he noticed a remarkable pattern. Their greatest battles weren't fought against competitors. They were fought against doubt, uncertainty, hesitation, and invisible fears that constantly tried to convince them to give up. Hill came to believe that mastering your inner world is the foundation of mastering your external world. In the final chapter of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill revealed what he considered one of the greatest hidden enemies of success. He called them the 6 ghosts of fear. They are the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of losing love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. At first glance, these fears seem ordinary. Everyone experiences them. But Hill argued that their real danger isn't their existence, it's their invisibility. They quietly influence career decisions, financial choices, relationships, and even the dreams we decide are too unrealistic to pursue. Fear almost never arrives dramatically. It doesn't knock on your door announcing itself. Instead, it appears as perfectly reasonable excuses. Maybe next year. I'm not ready yet. I need more experience. What if this doesn't work? People like me don't become successful. At first, these thoughts seem harmless, but repeated often enough, they become beliefs. And beliefs shape decisions. Decisions shape habits. Habits shape identity. Before long, an entire lifetime can be built around fears that never represented reality in the first place. Modern neuroscience gives remarkable support to Hill's observations. Our brains evolved to detect danger because survival once depended on it. Thousands of years ago, this instinct protected us from predators and harsh environments. Today, however, that same survival system often reacts to uncertainty as though it were a life-threatening emergency. Speaking in front of an audience, starting a business, investing your savings, changing careers, or publishing your work can trigger the same biological alarm system, even when no real danger exists. Your brain is trying to keep you safe. Unfortunately, it often protects you from the very opportunities capable of transforming your future. This explains why successful people aren't fearless. They simply refuse to let fear become their decision maker. They still experience uncertainty. They still doubt themselves. They still worry. The difference is that they understand something most people never learn. Fear is information, not instruction. It can warn you to prepare, but it should never decide whether you pursue a meaningful goal. Every extraordinary achievement in history was accomplished by someone who acted before feeling completely ready. As we begin exploring these 6 invisible ghosts, you'll probably recognize yourself in more than one of them. That's perfectly normal. The purpose of this chapter isn't to eliminate fear forever. That's impossible. The goal is to expose it, because once fear is brought into the light, it begins to lose its power. And among all 6 fears, one silently controls more financial decisions than any other. It's the fear that has prevented countless people from building wealth, pursuing opportunity, and creating financial freedom. That fear is the fear of poverty, and that's where our journey truly begins. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every financial decision you've made over the past 10 years was quietly influenced, not by logic, opportunity, or careful planning, but by a fear you never realized was controlling you. It sounds unbelievable, yet Napoleon Hill believed this is exactly what happens to millions of people. The fear of poverty is rarely obvious. It doesn't simply make people afraid of having less money. Instead, it quietly convinces them to settle for less than they're capable of achieving. According to Hill, poverty begins long before a bank account reaches zero. It begins in the mind. Before someone loses money, they often lose belief. They begin telling themselves that success belongs to someone else, that wealthy people are simply luckier, smarter, or born with advantages they'll never have. Slowly, those stories become accepted as facts, and once the mind accepts limitation, behavior follows naturally. Dreams become smaller, goals become safer, ambition quietly fades into routine. Think about how often fear disguises itself as responsibility. Someone says, "I'll start my business when the economy improves." Another says, "I'll invest after I've saved a little more." Someone else promises they'll pursue their passion once life becomes less busy. These sound like rational decisions. Sometimes they are. But often they are simply fear wearing the mask of logic. Years pass, circumstances change, yet the decision never changes. Tomorrow becomes next year becomes someday, and someday quietly disappears forever. Hill observed that successful people think differently about uncertainty. They don't wait for complete certainty because they know certainty rarely exists. Every investment carries risk. Every new business faces uncertainty. Every meaningful opportunity requires stepping into the unknown. Waiting until every question has been answered usually means waiting forever. Progress belongs to those willing to move before every doubt disappears. Modern behavioral economics supports this idea. Researchers have found that people often experience the pain of losing money much more intensely than the satisfaction of gaining the same amount. This tendency, known as loss aversion, can lead people to reject opportunities with positive long-term outcomes simply because they fear short-term discomfort. In other words, our brains naturally overestimate what we might lose and underestimate what we could gain. Imagine two people starting with exactly the same salary, education, and opportunities. The first spends years asking, "What if I lose?" The second constantly asks, "What can I learn?" They experience similar setbacks. They face similar uncertainty. But after 10 years, their lives often look completely different. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't luck. It is the question that guided thousands of daily decisions. One was driven by fear, the other by curiosity and growth. This is why Hill insisted that desire must become stronger than fear. When your purpose is powerful enough, temporary discomfort no longer feels like a reason to quit. It becomes part of the journey. Every successful entrepreneur, investor, creator, and innovator eventually discovers the same truth. Confidence doesn't appear before action. It grows because of action. Waiting to feel confident before taking the first step usually means waiting forever. But financial fear doesn't only stop people from starting businesses. Sometimes it quietly influences much smaller decisions. People avoid asking for promotions they deserve. They hesitate to negotiate salaries. They postpone learning valuable skills because they see education as an expense instead of an investment. They delay building multiple income streams because the process feels unfamiliar. None of these choices seem dramatic on their own, yet over decades, they shape entirely different financial futures. Consider one simple question. If you knew with absolute certainty that you could not fail, what would you begin this year? Would you launch a business? Write a book? Learn investing? Change careers? Start creating content online? Chances are, your answer reveals something important. It points directly toward the dream that fear has been quietly asking you to postpone, and perhaps the only thing standing between your current life and that future is one courageous decision. Napoleon Hill never suggested ignoring financial reality. He encouraged intelligent planning, disciplined saving, continuous learning, and wise decision-making. But he also warned against allowing fear to become the foundation of every financial choice, because decisions built entirely on fear rarely create freedom. They create survival, and survival, while necessary, is not the same as truly living. Financial independence begins not when you have millions in the bank, but when fear no longer controls every decision you make about money. Yet, as powerful as the fear of poverty may be, Napoleon Hill believed another invisible force often causes just as much damage. It has prevented countless people from speaking their ideas, starting YouTube channels, asking meaningful questions, expressing love, launching businesses, and sharing their gifts with the world. Unlike poverty, this fear doesn't attack your bank account first. It attacks your confidence. It is the fear of criticism. And once you understand how it operates, you'll begin noticing it almost everywhere. Have you ever stopped yourself from saying something? Not because it wasn't true, but because you were afraid of how people might react. Maybe you stayed quiet during an important meeting. Maybe you never published the video you spent weeks creating. Maybe you kept an incredible business idea to yourself because you imagined people laughing before anyone had the chance to support you. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not alone. According to Napoleon Hill, one of the greatest dream killers isn't failure. It's the fear of criticism. Unlike the fear of poverty, which often influences financial decisions, the fear of criticism attacks something even deeper: your identity. It makes you question your intelligence, your appearance, your abilities, and your worth. It convinces you that making mistakes is unacceptable, that being judged is dangerous, that standing out is somehow worse than remaining invisible. Slowly, without realizing it, you begin building a life designed not around your own dreams, but around avoiding other people's opinions. The strange thing is that most of the criticism we fear never actually happens. Our minds simply predict it. We imagine awkward conversations that never occur. We rehearse embarrassing moments that never exist. We picture rejection long before anyone has even heard our ideas. In many cases, we reject ourselves before the world has the opportunity to respond. Fear becomes both the judge and the jury, delivering a sentence before the trial has even begun. Modern psychology calls this the spotlight effect. The tendency to believe that everyone is paying far more attention to us than they actually are. In reality, most people are thinking about their own lives, their own insecurities, and their own challenges. The audience we fear is often too busy worrying about themselves to notice the mistakes we imagine they'll remember forever. Understanding this can be incredibly freeing. It reminds us that perfection is rarely required. Authenticity is far more valuable. Consider some of the world's most influential creators, entrepreneurs, and innovators. Nearly all of them were criticized in the beginning. Some were told their ideas were unrealistic. Others were mocked, underestimated, or ignored. Yet history remembers them not because everyone believed in them, but because they continued despite the doubt. Every meaningful contribution to the world was once considered impossible by someone. Think about your own life for a moment. How many opportunities have you quietly walked away from because you worried about what people might think? How many conversations have you postponed? How many skills have you delayed learning? How many chances to lead, create, invest, or speak have disappeared? Not because you lacked ability, but because you feared temporary embarrassment. Those moments may seem insignificant individually, yet together they quietly shape the direction of an entire lifetime. Napoleon Hill believed that confidence is never handed to us by other people. It is built through repeated acts of courage. Every time you speak, despite being nervous. Every time you create, despite uncertainty. Every time you take action before feeling completely ready. You teach your subconscious something powerful. You begin proving to yourself that discomfort is temporary, but growth can last a lifetime. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's evidence that you've learned to move alongside it. Ironically, the people we admire most rarely started with extraordinary confidence. Many successful speakers once feared public speaking. Many best-selling authors doubted their writing. Many business leaders questioned whether anyone would believe in their vision. Their advantage wasn't natural confidence. Their advantage was consistency. They acted before confidence arrived, and confidence eventually followed. Imagine if every successful person had waited until they felt completely prepared. How many companies would never have existed? How many books would never have been written? How many scientific discoveries would have remained hidden? How many lives would never have been changed? Progress has never depended on certainty. It has always depended on courage. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback. Constructive criticism is valuable because it helps us improve. Napoleon Hill never encouraged arrogance or stubbornness. Instead, he warned against allowing fear of criticism to silence our potential before we've even given ourselves the chance to grow. There is a profound difference between learning from criticism and living in fear of it. One helps you evolve. The other prevents you from beginning. Perhaps the most liberating realization is this: someone will criticize you no matter what you choose. If you stay comfortable, someone will say you're wasting your potential. If you pursue success, someone will accuse you of changing. If you fail, they'll question your decisions. If you succeed, they'll question your motives. Since criticism is unavoidable, perhaps the wiser question is not, how do I avoid being judged? But rather, is my dream important enough to continue anyway? As powerful as the fear of criticism may be, Napoleon Hill believed another invisible force quietly destroys just as many dreams. It convinces people that every mistake is permanent, every setback is proof they should stop, and every unsuccessful attempt defines who they are forever. It is the fear of failure, and perhaps no fear has prevented more people from discovering their true potential than this one. In the next chapter, we'll uncover why failure is often far closer to success than most people ever realize. What if everything you've been taught about failure is wrong? From childhood, many of us learn to see failure as something to avoid. A bad grade feels like proof we're not smart enough. A rejected job application feels like evidence we're not qualified. A failed business feels like the end of the journey, instead of one chapter within it. Over time, failure stops being something we experience. It becomes something we fear. And once that happens, we begin avoiding the very challenges that make growth possible. Napoleon Hill believed that every temporary defeat carries the seed of an equal or even greater opportunity. Notice he didn't say every defeat guarantees success. Instead, He believed every setback offers information, if we're willing to look for it. The people who eventually succeed aren't those who avoid mistakes. They're the ones who refuse to let mistakes become their identity. They ask different questions. Instead of saying, "Why did this happen to me?" they ask, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" History is filled with examples that prove this principle. Inventors created thousands of unsuccessful prototypes before discovering what worked. Entrepreneurs launched businesses that failed before building companies that changed industries. Athletes lost championships before becoming legends. Scientists spent years testing ideas that led nowhere before making discoveries that transformed the world. Looking backward, those failures appear essential. Looking forward, they often feel unbearable. The difference lies in perspective. Imagine if every successful person had stopped after their first disappointment. How many books would never have been published? How many companies would never have existed? How many life-changing inventions would have remained hidden forever? Every dream has a moment when quitting feels reasonable, yet that exact moment often separates ordinary stories from extraordinary ones. Persistence doesn't eliminate difficulty. It simply refuses to let difficulty write the ending. Modern research on resilience supports Hill's observations. People who view challenges as opportunities to learn recover more quickly from setbacks and remain motivated longer than those who interpret failure as a reflection of their worth. In other words, success depends less on avoiding failure and more on developing the ability to respond wisely when failure inevitably arrives. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you strengthen every time you choose to continue. This is why confidence doesn't come from always winning. It comes from surviving moments when you thought you couldn't continue and realizing you did. Every obstacle overcome becomes evidence stored inside your memory. Over time, those memories quietly replace doubt with certainty. They remind you that you faced uncertainty before and found your way through it. Yet, while many people fear failure, another invisible fear quietly consumes even more mental energy. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it appears as constant worry about every small ache, every unexpected symptom, every uncertain diagnosis. Napoleon Hill called this the fear of ill health. Although caring for our health is wise, living in constant anxiety about losing it can become another prison created by the mind. Our bodies and minds are deeply connected. Stress affects sleep. Poor sleep affects energy. Low energy reduces motivation. Reduced motivation often leads to unhealthy habits, creating a cycle that's difficult to escape. Fear can become self-reinforcing. The more we worry, the more exhausted we become. The more exhausted we become, the more convincing our worries appear. Hill recognized this connection long before modern neuroscience began explaining how chronic stress influences both physical and mental well-being. This doesn't mean pretending health problems don't exist. It means refusing to let fear become the center of your attention. There's an important difference between being health-conscious and being controlled by health anxiety. One inspires positive habits. The other steals peace without improving your future. Exercise, nutritious food, quality sleep, meaningful relationships, and a clear sense of purpose remain among the most powerful investments you can make, not only for your body, but also for your mind. Think about the moments when you felt your strongest. Chances are, they weren't the days when everything was perfect. They were the days when you felt purposeful. Purpose has a remarkable ability to redirect attention away from fear and toward action. When your mind becomes fully engaged in building something meaningful, it has far less space available for endless worry. That is one reason why people pursuing inspiring goals often appear more energetic, not because their lives are easier, but because their attention has found a healthier direction. As we continue this journey, you'll discover that even deeper fears remain. Some people fear losing those they love. Others quietly believe they've become too old to begin again. And many spend years worrying about time itself. These final, invisible ghosts may be the most emotional of all. Yet they also contain one of Napoleon Hill's most powerful lessons about courage, meaning, and living without regret. As we approach the final stage of Napoleon Hill's journey, two invisible fears remain. They are quieter than the others, yet they influence countless lives every day. The first is the fear of losing love. It appears whenever people hide who they truly are, because they're afraid of rejection. They remain silent instead of speaking honestly. They abandon dreams to satisfy expectations. They settle for relationships built on approval rather than authenticity. At first, these compromises seem small, but over time, they slowly erase the person they were meant to become. Healthy relationships are never built on pretending. They grow through trust, vulnerability, and truth. The people who genuinely belong in your life don't expect you to abandon your purpose to earn their acceptance. In fact, the strongest relationships often encourage growth rather than limit it. Sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to become the person you're capable of becoming. Then comes another fear that quietly convinces millions of people to postpone their dreams forever. The fear of old age. How often have you heard someone say, "I'm too old to start over"? Or, "If only I had begun 10 years earlier." Time becomes an excuse instead of a teacher. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that meaningful achievements have no expiration date. Some people discover their purpose at 20, others at 40, 60, or even later. The calendar measures years. It does not measure possibility. The truth is that every day will eventually become yesterday. Waiting rarely makes dreams easier to pursue. It simply reduces the number of opportunities remaining. The best moment to plant a tree may have been years ago. The second best moment has always been today. Progress doesn't ask how old you are. It asks whether you're willing to begin. Finally, Napoleon Hill speaks about the fear of death. At first, this may seem like the darkest of all fears, yet perhaps it carries the brightest lesson. When we remember that life is finite, we begin paying closer attention to what truly matters. We become less interested in impressing strangers and more interested in living with purpose. We realize that time is our most valuable investment, and every ordinary day is quietly becoming part of the story we leave behind. And now, if you step back and look at everything Napoleon Hill has shared throughout Think and Grow Rich, something extraordinary begins to appear. None of the principles stand alone. Desire gives your future a destination. Faith keeps you moving when results haven't appeared. Persistence carries you through setbacks. Organized planning transforms dreams into action. Specialized knowledge creates value. The mastermind principle reminds you that no one succeeds entirely alone. Decision replaces hesitation with commitment, and overcoming fear unlocks the power hidden inside every one of these principles. Together, they form a complete philosophy for building not only wealth, but a meaningful life. But knowledge alone changes nothing. Every book you've ever read, every podcast you've ever listened to, every inspiring speech you've ever heard has only had value if it influenced the decisions you made afterward. Information can inspire you for a day. Action can transform your life for decades. The question is no longer whether Napoleon Hill's ideas are powerful. The question is whether you'll choose to apply them after this video ends. So before you leave this video, I'd like to invite you to do something simple, but potentially life-changing. Take a sheet of paper. Write down the single greatest fear that's holding you back today. Don't judge it. Don't hide from it. Just write it down honestly. Then, underneath it, write 3 actions you can take within the next 7 days to move one step closer to the life you truly want. Not next month, not someday, this week, because transformation rarely begins with giant leaps. It begins with one decision followed by one small action. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of the 6 ghosts of fear has influenced your life the most? Was it the fear of poverty, criticism, failure, losing love, old age, or something else entirely? Share your answer in the comments below. Your story may become the encouragement someone else needs to finally begin their own journey. One conversation can inspire thousands of people who are silently fighting the same battles. If this audiobook has given you a new perspective, consider subscribing to the channel and joining us for future journeys through the world's greatest books on success, personal growth, financial freedom, psychology, and timeless wisdom. Every week, we explore ideas that have transformed lives for generations. And together, we'll continue turning knowledge into action. If someone came to mind while listening today, share this video with them. Sometimes, one conversation, one book, or one idea arrives at exactly the right moment to change a life forever. Napoleon Hill left us with one unforgettable sentence. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Yet after completing this journey together, perhaps you'll discover an even deeper truth. Wealth begins in the mind long before it appears in your bank account. Courage begins long before confidence. Greatness begins long before recognition. And the life you've been hoping for doesn't begin someday in the future. It begins the moment you decide that fear will no longer make your decisions for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until our paths cross again, keep learning, keep growing, keep believing, and never stop becoming the person you were created to be.